So, who is St. Vincent? I guess that's a great question. When we think about Vincent de Paul, oftentimes we think about the great work that Frederick Ozanam did and created the Vincent de Paul Society. But we have to go back beyond that, beyond the 19th century, back to 1581 in the village of Pouilly in Gascogne, the province kind of below Bordeaux in France. And it's there that this little boy named Vincent is born and is working on a farm with his parents. There's not much. I mean, they have sustenance in the crops that they grow and that they eat. There's a little bit to sell, but really there's not much for the family. But Vincent, from the time he's about 8, it kind of captures in the local parish priest and in the local bishop this imagination that this young man is really intelligent. Okay, of all the schoolboys that serve Mass, Vincent understands what to do. Okay, he understands what Father says when he gives instructions. He's not just kind of floating out there, and I think that's what initially interests the church in investing in Vincent. So had his family not been so devout, had they not been always at Mass, he may have been passed over. But since he wasn't, since he was there and excited, wanting to learn, showing this great piety, but also passion, for the liturgy, the bishop and the pastor both find money for him, a scholarship. We call it a benefice at that time, in which it would pay for everything, because there, as I mentioned, there is no money at home. That's why Vincent's off to seminary at 14. Okay, it's amazing now we think today. And he's finished with seminary at 19. Okay, so his ordination is in 1600. So he's 19 years old. His bishop has to give a special permission because the Council of Trent had set initially at 25, and then they backed it up to 23. But 19, that's really young even for the 17th century. So we have this new priest in 1600 who is, again, just really impressing people. When he speaks to people, his Latin is really good. His comprehension of theology is superb. He's articulate, and he's from this little teeny town. So I mean, this is great. This guy is going to be important, the bishop believes, and that's why he goes ahead with the early ordination. And Vincent is sent to Paris not long after that to do further studies. And that must have been amazing, going from a farming village to Paris. Paris in 1600 is the center of everything. I mean, Louis XIV has not yet finished Versailles. He hasn't moved the court there yet, so everybody's still in Paris. The king is living at the Louvre. I mean, that's the Louvre Palace. I mean, that's the center of France. And to study at the University of Paris, oh my goodness. You know, it's been around since the 1200s. And Vincent begins his studies, but more importantly, he begins making friends with people, especially Cardinal Bérulle, who is the founder of what we call the French School of Spirituality. He befriends other people who are equally intelligent and form this group that sits down and really debates theology. So he's kind of on the cutting edge at a time not too long after Trent. It's about 60 years after the Council of Trent is over, but France still hasn't implemented a lot of the Tridentine reforms. So it's in the middle. It's in this middle growing period. And you have this young scholar Vincent de Paul, who's eagerly just eating up everything that Augustine wrote. You know, he's fascinated by that. He's fascinated by grace. That's his big treatise. You know, why grace? Why does God so freely, continually impart on his people this life-changing, supernatural gift of his grace? And he also begins to experience the world. Okay, so he's not lived, quote unquote, in the world, but now he's in Paris. And he's introduced to parties. They called them salons at the time. You know, these great meetings of the minds, where people gather and eat good food and drink nice drink, and debate and discuss. But Vincent, his heart is torn. Okay, at this period, he's 21, 22, a young priest, and everything seems to be in Paris about possessions. If you're going to be an upstanding clergy member, you have to dress the part, you have to act the part, and when people come to your rectory or your room, you have to have some nice things. And Vincent really slides right into that lifestyle. He becomes real obsessed with material things, to the point that later in life he uses the word, "I am horrified at my younger self." Okay. So this plays into, I think, where Vincent has an opportunity for transformation, and we see this. He's left a couple inheritances by people that he knew when he was his early years in Paris. And he had a lot of wealthy, elderly women friends. Okay, it's something that continues on, I think, is very easy to fall into in religion, to have people outside who fund things or something for us. He struggles with that because it's a chair here. Madame, de Joly left you this chair. Another of these elderly women leaves you this couch. Someone leaves you a set of bed furniture. Someone leaves you a set of a man's silk suit, a dark suit. These are things that he wants because he wants to fit in. And the clergy of Paris are all living very high on the hog. This is going to be no surprise when we come to the French Revolution that the clergy are attacked as well, because they're living just as high as the nobility, and they are demanding that everyone else live out their vows, if you will. So Vincent goes on a trip, on one of these trips, to go and get more furniture that he's inherited. The estate is in Marseille. He goes down by coach to the south of France, and in order to save time, because he needs to get back to Paris, he uses some extra money that he has to buy a ferry pass to Marseille. It's easier to go by water. And a day into that ferry journey, Barbary pirates from the coast of North Africa attack the ship and remove everyone on it and take them to Tunis. And Vincent then explains in a letter 3 years later what happens, because he disappears off the historical record for 3 years. The Bishop of Paris presumes he's died, okay, that he is drowned. The boat doesn't come back, right? They must have hit rough seas in the Mediterranean. What happens is that the boat is boarded. that these pirates take Vincent and I believe there's 11 other people on the boat. They take them to Tunis. They take them to a bazaar. Okay, this is a completely different religion, different understanding, different worldview. So this is not old Europe. And I make a point of that because we might think today, oh, Tunisia, Morocco, they're vacation destinations. No, this was part of the great caliphate. I mean, this is Islam. This is a completely different world experience and a completely different religion. And Vincent steps off the pirate's boat in chains, right? And he mentions about his silk sleeves being torn by the chains. They're marched into the bazaar. They're stripped of all their clothing and they're trotted around, he says, like horses, all right, as people are literally bidding on them. So he has this experience of the complete poverty of Christ. I mean, it totally bursts in his world, right? And there he is, nothing, no clothes, no possessions, and he's on a block with a chain and a collar on his neck and being sold in a language he does not speak, in a world that is foreign to him, and in a religion that is not his own. So the fact that he's a cleric means nothing. He's sold to the highest bidder and taken as a manservant to a house, which means he helps the gentleman of the house dress. He helps with feeding the men. The household was divided, men and women. And Vincent is experiencing at this time what it's like to live in a place where there's nobody cares about him, right? They don't care that he doesn't speak Arabic. They don't care that he is not of their religion because he is a slave, right? And he is subhuman, right? That's his experience. It's 3 years into this where he's pretty much told God, I guess I'm here, right? And he works very hard. He gets a little bit of sustenance. They don't give him money, but they give him, maybe if he's working very hard, maybe he gets another tunic to wear or something. He's allowed to have the scraps from the table, things like that. So he kind of just reconciles to the fact that this might be my life. And a missionary comes to Tunis on a trip, from the Pope. Now, what the popes did at this time, they knew that this happened. And the caliphs knew that the popes would be sending people with money to buy people out of slavery, to buy Christians out of slavery. So this is what happens to Vincent. Literally, one day his master comes in and says, you're free to go with this man. You've been purchased from me. The group goes back to Marseille, and at this point Vincent writes the whole account. He writes it down and sends a letter to Paris ahead of him saying, I'm not dead. I thought I was dead, but something changed in me, and now none of this means anything. And he goes to Paris, and the bishop is expecting him to want to go immediately back to his academic pursuits, and Vincent says, no, send me to a parish. And he sends him to a parish, but Vincent's doing all this strange stuff, like inviting the poor into the rectory, having them live there. This is not going over well with his brother priests, right? Why are you wearing black cotton? They can't understand. Why are you wearing wool? There's silk, Vincent. Vincent has changed his whole persona, and they don't get it, that he's just dressing plainly now. So the bishop assigns him to one of the furthest parishes in the diocese. The church is being used as a stable. They haven't had a priest in like 6 years. And he goes and completely revitalizes the parish. Everybody in this little town is completely impoverished. I mean, rags. Right? When the bishop visits, he notices that they're dressed in humble but clean clothing, that they themselves are clean. That the men's beards are shaped. They're not, going out everywhere. That the women are clean. That the children are fed. And he inquires about this, and Vincent says, well, this is what God is calling me to do. And soon the next town over, Vincent starts working. And then diocesan priests start coming to him and saying, how can I help? And he says, go in the ditch with that woman and help her get out. Go to that brothel and take this money and buy one of the women out of prostitution. Do you see that group of kids over there? Make them something to eat. Do you see that old man? His sores smell terribly. Bathe him. Do you see the prison across town with the men hanging out the windows? All right, go in there and talk to them. But first, what I want you to do is I want you to kiss their chains. And this is what these young priests start doing. And it's one parish. It's another town. It's a province of France. It's Île-de-la-France, the great county where Paris is. And it spreads through France, then into Spain, into Germany. And by the time of Vincent's death in 1660, it's everywhere but Antarctica. Every continent has these people, the congregation of the mission, he calls them. About 20 years into his mission, he has a chance meeting by this widow, wealthy widow named Louise de Marillac. And she wants to meet him because she's had a dream where she's seen him, but she doesn't know his name. She's not been given any information. And she's going around Paris to priest to priest to priest saying, there's this guy, all right, he's in his 40s. He has a short-cut beard, and he works with the poor. He bathes them and feeds them. And I want to support that. And they're like, Vincent, you mean Vincent? Oh, yes, Vincent, you have to go. He's now living in a place called Saint-Lazare in Paris, which means St. Lazarus, and takes up the Lazarus who's sitting at the gate as the patron saint of the order, the one that everybody walks past, as Jesus tells us in that parable, that is saved because of his lowliness and all of his suffering, and so we have this beautiful imagery. And Louise goes there and she meets Vincent, and she has this money. She gives everything. She has gigantic inheritance from her husband. And he says, why don't you join what we're doing? Right? So as a widow, she had money, so that was her protection. But now she has nothing, so she does join Vincent. And she gets other widow friends who want to help to join, and they form the Daughters of Charity. So they're an order of widows, as St. Paul says, and the Acts of the Apostles, that the widows should be taken care of, but they should also be doing this kind of ministry. So they're out there too. And it's just so transformative for the church in Paris at a time where the clergy are completely falling into this trap of materiality and things. He saves the church in France by reintroducing the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. It's so powerful. And that's who this St. Vincent is. When he says at the end of his life, when his disciples, who now number in the thousands, men and women, when they say, what should we do next? What is our job? He says, to go to every town, to every parish, and to remind people of the love of Christ, to bathe them, to feed them, and then to tell them about Jesus. Show them Jesus, and then tell them about Jesus. He said, don't make the mistake of going in lecturing and beating them over the head, but show them who Christ is, that you are of Christ, and then let them experience the catechesis. So he renews, this order renews the church in France. So by the time of the Revolution, I think that's how the church survives, is the Vincentians in the outer parishes had catechized all of the French people by this point. So the revolution happens, there is a great turmoil in the church, but that's 1789. By 1803, Napoleon has restored the hierarchy, and the church continues. I mean, it was hurt, but it wasn't destroyed. And I think that's another gift that Vincent gives. So he wants us to go back to the teachings of Jesus and live those, and that will bring about God's kingdom here on earth and remind us that we are all not only beloved, but we're all to be serving one another. So oftentimes I'm asked the question, why are we called St. Vincent? He's not a Benedictine. In fact, when I was in Paris, I stayed with the Vincentians at the mother house, the kind of the daughter of Saint Lazare. And the superior came up to me the first night at dinner and said, "You're from a monastery called St. Vincent?" And I said, "Yes, it's from a parish called St. Vincent." And they were fascinated. And I think that's an important question to answer because it's our heritage. It's who we are. So when the parish is originally founded here in 1789, Father Brouwers, the Franciscan who founded it, is himself leaving the French Revolution. All right, this is a difficult time. So it's tied once again to France. He arrives here in the New World, and he wants, like anything, to be a good missionary priest. So he's Dutch, he can speak German, he can speak Dutch, and he can speak French. And he's learning English in his time here. When Father Brouwers makes his way to the western part of Pennsylvania, he's able to purchase a little piece of land that is called Sportsman's Hall. Right? It has been used as a tract for farming, and as of late, before he arrived, it was a place of hunting. And it had been owned by a man named Joseph Hunter and John Fraser before him. So it's an interesting piece of land in that it's so isolated. And the closest place, or the closest civilized area, is a place called Newtown, which we call Greensburg today. I always like to tell students, if you're on 30 and you see the sign for West Newton, that's West Newtown. It's a city west of Newtown or Greensburg. So out here, founding a parish is really in the wilderness. And that's what Father Brouwers does. He's a pioneer. I mean, he's out here with several groups of immigrants, right, who are farming shortly after the end of the French and Indian War. So these are individuals who are trying their best in a new place with very few resources, and especially they're lacking the resource of a faith environment. And that's what Father Brouwers gives them by building Sportsman's Hall, all right, which he uses half of for the parish, the actual church, and he lives in the other half of it. And it retains that name. It becomes a parish first of the Diocese of Baltimore, then of the Diocese of Philadelphia, which it remains until 1844, whenever it's carved into the Diocese of Pittsburgh. But if we think about the history of the buildings here, there's that log cabin called Sportsman's Hall, then there's a second wooden church, and then the third church is made of brick. And the congregants are extremely excited about this because it's permanent. Right? And they have enough money. You know, these farming people have worked decades by this point, almost 50 years, to put together something that is a testament to their faith and a testament to this American dream that anything can happen in this new world. So they prepare this beautiful building, brick, handmade, with pews and woodwork from the American chestnut trees from the ridge. This is before the blight, so the wood is just perfect. It's not wormy chestnut. And now what they need is it to be consecrated. Okay, this is going to be a permanent church. This is no longer a pioneer cabin where they have Mass. That's what's so important about this. This is going to become a parish. So the parish priest writes to the Archbishop of Philadelphia, Bishop Kendrick. He writes back and he says, "On my circuit this summer, 1835, I will make my way through Allegheny County and then come back around through Westmoreland County, and I will stop at Sportsman's Hall, and I will dedicate your church. Right? They get a second letter that says when he's about halfway there, okay, I expect to be there in the middle of July. Okay? And what they're hearing and what we can trace, this is fascinating to me as a historian, what they're hearing from people of other parishes 100 miles away is that Bishop Kendrick, when he stops the day that he dedicates, he looks in his breviary and sees who's the saint that day, and that's the name they get. That's his practice. All right, so we can literally trace that summer of 1835 from Philadelphia out here and know where he was on what date by the old universal calendar of the Catholic Church. So he arrives at St. Vincent on July 19th in the morning, 1835. July 19th in the old calendar is the feast of Vincent de Paul. And he consecrates the church to the protection and patronage of St. Vincent de Paul. This French priest, he knows of Fort Ligonier, the bishop. He knows that there's a French connection here. And it just all works out. It's Feast of St. Vincent, this is who you get. They light the consecration candles. He chrismates the altar with the sacred chrism and chants the solemn mass of consecration. And the congregants, for the first time, have a solid building that's their parish. They have a patron saint, and from there forward, this name St. Vincent is kept with who we are. When Boniface Wimmer arrives in 1846, so it's only 11 years later, he promises to now the Bishop of Pittsburgh that he will stand up for these people. He will stay here and be their priest, all right, and take over the parish. And there's some concern among the parishioners. Are you going to call us by another name? Are you going to take our patron away? And Wimmer actually thinks about it and writes in a letter about 3 or 4 weeks after arriving at St. Vincent that it's come to him, like it's come to him supernaturally, I believe, but it's come to me that St. Vincent de Paul is the patron of this enterprise, okay? It's the patron of this enterprise because I've come here to work with the people who everyone has forgotten about, the immigrant, right? And especially the Germans. He's very excited about that, to be able to provide something for these German immigrants. And as we know, as the story develops, his eyes are widened and he realizes his mission is much greater than to one single group of immigrants. And that's, I think, the inspiration of Vincent de Paul. The mission just isn't here in Paris. It just isn't here in Gascogne. It's everyone. And that's, I think, what impressed Wimmer about Vincent de Paul and why he kept that name. So imagine that this German monk, this little ball of energy from Bavaria, comes across the Atlantic and becomes the pastor of St. Vincent Parish. And initially, the parishioners and he are kind of looking at one another, across the expanse of the physical building of the church, because not everybody in the congregation is German. Wimmer realizes right away when he first sets foot on St. Vincent soil that the mission that he is called to here is much broader than what he initially thought, it just being for Germans. He realized that there's a whole group of people, a whole population that nobody cares about, that nobody is investing in, because they are from different places that speak different languages. And Wimmer, very much as he takes the example of Vincent de Paul and that charism, where Vincent de Paul goes into his mission and realizes right away it's not just Paris, and then it's not just France, it's the whole world that we're called to serve. Wimmer really encapsulates that in his early mission to America and his early mission to the parish here at St. Vincent. So there are Germans, but then there are also Irish who speak this language called English that Wimmer does not speak. There are Italians and Czechs and Slovaks and Polish people coming from all parts of the world to this area for a new life. And Wimmer realizes, with sometimes great trepidation, that he's called to minister to each and every one of these groups as much as he is to his own ethnic and language group. And I think that's what makes St. Vincent so important and such a wonderful pole, if you will, of Catholicism that draws so many people to the parish and draws so many people even today to experience that welcome that we all have felt when we come to St. Vincent. So Wimmer starts with that initial parish group and then realizes right away that these people have little ones. They have children. And these children are not getting an education. There's no standard for education in 1846 in this country. It's the religious groups that have to take really control of that and afford everybody education. Okay, Wimmer knew himself, much like Vincent de Paul, that it was because of somebody seeing something of import in him that he was able to be educated. The same with Vincent de Paul, and Wimmer wanted to bring that to the people of St. Vincent Parish and of Westmoreland County, then of Pennsylvania, then of the United States, and then to the world. My favorite quote of Wimmer's, "We belong to the whole world." So imagine that, having a school where you have Irish children sitting next to German children, sitting next to Italian children, sitting next to Czech and Slovak and Polish children, and each of them learning English together. The monk who's teaching them, and later on the nun who's teaching them, along with their parents too. The children bring that home. And these are the first Americans, if you think about it, because this is still the wilderness in 1846. So this pioneer parish, this pioneer people matched up with this pioneer monk as their pastor, begin to do great things here. And Wimmer wants to make sure that there is not a cost associated when he founds these schools. St. Vincent Grade School, then there's St. Vincent High School, then St. Vincent College and Seminary, that the children of immigrants can come here and be educated because there's something important about them. And what is that? They're children of God. They're children of God. That's what he sees in each and every one of them. So even when they go on to build the Basilica, the parish and the monks together, they decide that the people who should break the ground are the children. And on that rainy March day in 1891, it is the children of St. Vincent Parish, who by now would be the great-grandchildren of those first children that Wimmer taught, are there with their shovels, breaking ground in the rain, and remember that for the rest of their lives, and hand that memory down to their great-great-grandchildren who are the parishioners of today. Wimmer takes that same spirit that he learns at St. Vincent Parish, that he develops here in all of his missions, not only to people who are of German descent and Italian and Polish and Czech and Slovak, but also to other ethnic groups, especially in the South. He has a special ministry to freed slaves and begins to educate them and found a school for them, just as he had at St. Vincent. So that whether someone is black or white, whether they are German or from Africa or from Asia or from Europe, they all have an opportunity to be educated and to be part of this thing that we call St. Vincent. And it all begins at the parish. Everything starts there, and from their flowers outward. to cover really the new world with an opportunity. Okay, because again, these people were coming from Europe not with wealth, not with possessions, but with their faith alone. And that's what Wimmer has too. He doesn't have much when he crosses the Atlantic except for 18 students and then the parish that embraces him. And from that little beginning, as we know, much grows. Boniface Wimmer's mission to America is very evident, even as we sit here in Placid Hall that's 170 years old. That brick and mortar is very much part of what has to happen, the buildings so that education, that worship can happen. And I often think of St. Vincent de Paul using the brick and mortar of the gospel, of the life of Christ. Vincent goes to enlighten the world about what charity really means. And I'm struck by a quotation that he leaves us that says, "Charity is the cement which binds communities to God and persons to one another." That's Vincent de Paul. That's St. Vincent Parish. That's the teaching of Jesus Christ.